Well, hello everyone. So my name is Nicolas Hoford. I am the tech lead on the design tools on Android Studio. And John?
Hi, I'm John Hoford. I develop on design tools.
So today we're going to talk to you about design tools. Look at that. So a couple of things first. We started, if you may remember, with Android Studio 2.2 and a brand new layout editor, taking advantage of constraint layouts to create screens easier. Suffice to say that since then, we worked a little on the product. So here's a few interesting dates on the timeline. So we released the layout editor in alpha in 2.2. In 3.0, I'd say this is when the layout editor started to be actually properly useful. And in 3.3, we released the navigation editor, which was the second design tools that was done closely in collaboration with the Android framework as well. So they did the library side and we did the designer. And we move on in 3.4 with the resource manager. 3.5 was the project marble, where we spent a lot of time making sure that everything works as they should. And going on with 3.6 and now 4.0. And in parallel of that track, our team has also been working on the constraint layout and now with MotionLayout libraries. And the idea is really to build libraries in close collaboration with the design tools, because we believe that hopefully trigger a better experience. So a few words about kind of what's the philosophy of our team, or what is it that we are trying to achieve there. And essentially we want something that is user focused, right? At the end of the day, we are trying to build tools for developers, and we want to build stuff that you find useful, that makes your life easier. We want them to be easy to use, but at the same time, we also want them to be able to scale with your knowledge or your, what you need to do with them. So it's great to build, easy, accessible tool, but if those tools fall apart when you get to a complex stage, that's no good. So we are trying to do all of that. And finally, and that's an important one, we are trying to be transparent. So what do I mean by that? I mean that it would actually be a lot easier for us if the design tools would simply output some kind of black box format and magic would happen. But no, you are actually creating XML files, and we want those tools to be as transparent as possible in what they generate. So that means that the code generated should be clear, but it's also important that you understand what part of the tools generate the XML, so that you can really map the XML, what is generated in XML and what is done by the tool. So that's what I mean by transparency, and we'll see that during this talk in several examples. So 3.5. 3.5, as was always known as the marble release. And we focused a lot on this release with stability, memory pressure, and all of that. But on the face of it, you would think, well, not much to do with design tools. Well, other than the fact that, funnily enough, when you write graphical programs, they do tend to use a lot of memory. And so, we were one of the area that actually benefited a lot from the efforts done in the overall Android Studio architecture. And more specifically to the design tools, we also spent quite a bit of time improving the rendering pipeline, making things faster, and that actually had a direct implication on the type of tools we were able to then deliver, like the motion editor. The other thing that I'd point in that release is, after 3.4, this was kind of like the release where all those different tools that we had, so the layout editor, the navigation editor, but also the resource manager, all started to work together in a nice, more symbiotic way. So it started to feel more like a suite of design tools and not just one tool and then another one. John?
So in 3.6, what we did was the first sort of important thing is where we we actually created a unified approach where we can see both the design surface and the XML text editor in parallel. So you can see both of them at the same time. And you can switch between them, or you can have a split view. So if we look at what that looks like in reality, you can now see both. And notice they work together. So when you select something on one side, you see it selected on the other side. It provides you with a very seamless interface. So you can change a value in the attributes panel, and it will change the value on the XML. So you can sort of see a much greater integration between the two systems now. This also applies to the navigation editor as well. So if you're doing a navigation editor approach, notice even the actual connections between things are being selected and reflected. The attribute panel is there. And that brings us to another fairly big effort we did within the navigation editor. So in the navigation editor, this time we've added the attributes panel. So the same attributes panel is being used in both, and that provides you with lots of functionality. If you change an attribute, you get autocompletes, you get lint errors. You can actually command click into it and navigate to that particular wherever that's declared in your file system. You also have access to all the resources of the resource manager. So you get a much more sort of comprehensive view with the new attributes panel. That brings us to the resource manager. The resource manager is greatly enhanced from the last one. So, and if you haven't looked at the resource manager before, I highly recommend it. It's very useful. You can see a wide variety of things, your strings, your fonts, styles, a lot of things you wouldn't think about using a resource manager for. A few examples here, we can sort of see where you're being able to access fonts and menus and just a large random, your strings. An interesting one is the internationalization strings. And there's more. You can actually use it as a place where to launch off creation of like vector drawable or colors or things like that, fonts. One of the things that we enable too is things like searching and being able to access drag and drop directly from that. So here you see I just dragged and I dropped it right inside of the thing. So it becomes a sort of more seamless part of your development experience. So you can use it to say, oh, I want this. That also works inside of the design surface.
Yeah, and the new resource picker is using the same architecture as the resource manager, so you get all the goodies as well there.
Yes.
So that brings us to, if you know how to count, to 4.0. And in 4.0, we actually did a lot of work. A lot of new things are appearing in 4.0. And we're actually in the beta cycle right now, and so if you have not tried 4.0, I highly encourage you to do so. So let's cover a little bit of the novelties there. So first, in the layout editor, we didn't leave the layout editor alone. We still continue to work on it and iterate version after version. So we did a couple of things. One, the split view mode that we introduced in 3.6. Well, we made it a little more easy to discover. Turns out only icons is not automatically easy to grasp. So we added, nice labels, and that should be a much clearer way of, realizing what's going on. So can't resist to show you a little bit more, how it works, and notice as well how fast and snappy that becomes. So that's another reason why we moved to the split view, is that everything gets a lot faster. The other thing we introduced in 4.0 related to the layout editor is custom view preview. And if you ever developed a custom view on Android, you probably had a setup a little bit like that, where you had your code, with your custom view, and then you created like some kind of XML with, containing your own custom view, and then you can, see it in the preview. So now in 4.0, you don't need to do any of that. You can just go on the class itself, and if it's an Android view, we'll show you the preview directly. And it's reacting directly, so you can set up the wrap content or etc. just to see how it resizes. And here you notice that I'm modifying the text, setting something else, and after a compilation, we show you the update. So the idea is that you could iterate a lot faster this way. It also works with, let's take a simpler example of a custom view. Here I just have like a custom view showing, a red background. You notice, the design-centered programming world here with beautiful text and, my beautiful background. But the nice thing is that I can just resize everything, and you notice everything is live in real time. And again, the idea is to make the iteration and the development cycle faster. We also updated the way you can access material icons in the different design tools. So we added like thousands of icons, the different themes, everything that you can get downloaded. To create one, you just create a new vector asset, and you come up with this new dialog where you can filter things, search for it, etc. One of the big new features in 4.0 that we're really happy to release in 4.0 is the motion editor. And John is going to talk about it a little more in depth later on, but I can't resist to show you a little bit how it works. So, you start from a constraint layer to motion layout, and that's it. I'm in the motion editor. And just to show you very, very, very quickly how you can go on and create a simple animation. Here I'm just selecting that view, changing the visibility, and making it invisible. You notice I click on the transition, that's this little arrow there, and notice I can see the impact of having changed that visibility. If I go back to the end state and do something slightly more interesting or slightly more visual, you notice everything reacts, and you can immediately see the result in the design surface, and you can just go back and forth like that. So John is going to cover that in a lot more details, but I could not resist to show you that. The other tool that we introduced in 4.0 is called layout validation. And that's one I'm really glad that we are shipping finally, because it's something that we kind of used to have in Studio and we lost, and now we were able to redo it with the new infrastructure, and it's a lot of nice things. So essentially, that's a tool that lets you show different representation of your current layout. And ultimately, we want to evolve it into a validation tool that will actually automatically analyze your layout and gives you a lot of feedback. But right now, that analysis is done by you, the user. So you can see the different form factors. You can also check against color blindness simulations. So you can see how your UI is going to behave for colorblind people. You can also visualize how it works with different font settings. Some people are setting the system font larger or smaller, and you can see that in a snap. There's more stuff. You can see locals. You can also create your own configurations or series of configurations there. So it's a very powerful tool, and yeah, I think people are going to really like it. We also introduced a brand new layout inspector, and it's pretty cool. So that's the inspector. Let me show you a little bit how it works. So if I go there, I can of course, select the different elements. And notice you got the component tree on the left. I can switch to the 3D mode, so you can see all the different layers are laid out. All the selection still works, and you notice as well all the attributes of the element you selected are on the right. But we go further than that. One specific nice thing is we actually trace, and that's above like API 28. But if you have a device above that, we can select an element and show you where it actually comes from. So notice here, I select something. I was fancy with the 3. You got this color, and you want to know where that colors come from, and we show you the link. You can go back to the file. Here, I had it open already. I can change the color, see it, replicate it in the live editor, but I can push it to the device, and we'll see it applied like that. So this is very convenient to navigate or inspect layouts on a running application. It only works with debug applications, by the way, but it is a really, really useful tool for developers. And finally, for covering a little bit of the work that we are doing right now in Android Studio on the design tools, I'm going to talk about Compose. And it is just a preview. So it's not ready to ship. It's a lot of bleeding edge stuff. But if you want to try it, so if you want to try those tools, you can download the latest canary, so the 4.1 canaries. And again, I would encourage you to play with that and file feedback or bug report for us. That is super valuable for us. So let's cover a little bit what we do provide right now, because we have a lot more ideas. But what we do provide right now is we start with the Compose preview. So if you have a composable, you see that code on the left. We'll show you the same way that we have like this custom view for Android. We'll show you that preview there. And similarly, you can change the code and see it reflected on the preview. Here's another example. Notice here that I have multiple visualization of the multiple preview composable that I have. So it can be a really nice way to have that visualization panel to see all the different composable in your file. You notice I can also customize that preview. Here I'm just setting the decoration. So and there's more stuff. You can set the size, etc., etc. Here is another example where I have this layout, this composable that show me this calculator layout. It's very easy for me to just create another preview with different settings. So here I'm setting up the width and height differently, and you notice it just right there. So that again, the idea is to provide you a design, like a design surface and a preview surface that is very customizable. One thing that we are exploring, and again, keep in mind, bleeding edge, all of that, it's called the interactive preview. And the interactive preview, it's interesting because essentially what we're running in the design surface, it's your code, right? So notice on that preview, you got those two little icons on the top. And if I click on the one slightly on the left, I switch to the interactive mode. And notice that I can then click on the button. And of course, I get, well, the answer. But and again, like this is not quite an emulator because we're only running the code that you have in your project. If you do stuff like network requests or things like that, that won't work. But we believe that we at least we hope that we are going to provide a much nicer experience when you develop those custom components and a much faster iterations, speed essentially. Okay, so that said, one sec. That said, sometimes you do want to run those things on an actual device. Again, you might do a network call or something like that. So we thought about that too. And if you notice, and I should have zoomed on that slide, but there is this little tiny icon on the gutter in the code editor next to your preview composable. And if I click on it, it's going to take any composable that you have like that. It's going to take it and push it on the emulator, and you'll be able to see it. So, forget some of the visual glitches, but you get the idea. And we also believe that's going to be very, very convenient when you really want to test on the actual device, actual hardware, or even just in the emulator, but you want to test one specific component. Essentially, we want to remove a lot of the boilerplate for you. All right, I think that concludes this quick overview of what's coming up in 4.0. And John is now going to talk a little more in depth into Motion Editor because, well, you know, he's the lead on that project and he's there, so might as well take advantage of that. John?
Yes. So the first thing, let me sort of set the stage by going through a simple example. We convert to MotionLayout. We then make a couple of changes. We look at the starting and ending state. We can look at the timeline. But in the starting state, we're going to just move it to the bottom left. And in the ending state, we move it to the top right. And now if you click on the timeline, we see that we can track back and forth. And now in this case, I will create a key position. And what that will allow me to do is alter the path of the bounds of the view. So here, I just created it generically. And now one of the interesting things is you can actually grab an anchor point where that keyframe is and distort the keyframe. And I'll have another example of that very powerful tool for visualization of the views. So let's look at a quick overview of all of the parts of the system. We have the palette, we have the component tree, we have the design surface, what we call the design surface. We have the attributes panel, and we have the motion editor when in this particular mode when the constraints are selected. And one of the interesting things that you can do is you can see that it has a subtle navigational mark to show you where it is on which transition. So you can actually use that to help you when you're doing large complex transitions. And you'll see that examples of that later. Now we have the ability to create multiple constraint sets, multiple transitions, and they can also derive from constraint sets can derive from each other's. You can also create gestures, which are a mouse click or a swiping gesture. And in fact, you can have multiple gestures through different transitions. It can get very complicated. The other thing that we have is in this overview graph, we have the ability, we have lots of little tiny graphical elements that show you things. What just happened, Nicolas? Nicolas, thank you. In this particular case, what we have is showing you the different motion layout attributes, the constraint sets, the transitions, the mouse click, everything is actually graphically represented for you. Okay. Now, the way it's described, it's actually representing the motion scene file. So if you know a little bit about motion layout, most of it is being controlled by a motion scene file. It follows a one-to-one correspondence with the motion scene file. So even in a very complex case, and this is kind of a very enhanced case, we see that it has the different transitions from top to bottom mapped to different transitions from top to bottom on the user interface, on the XML. And left to right, the old small base start, they all correspond to different constraint sets. And these arrows are showing you which ones are derived from which ones. So notice you can use it to navigate between all the different constraint sets. You can, and transitions, by simply clicking on the different objects within the system, and the attribute panel will reflect that information. Now let's go into a little bit of what you see in this table here. The table, we call it the selection panel, and it has really 3 different modes to it. When your motion layout is selected, the constraint set selected, or if you have a transition selected. And if you have a motion layout selected, it's showing you what the component is, the ID of it, and whether it's properly constrained in both horizontal and vertical, and where those constraints come from. If you have a constraint set selected, it will actually show you where the constraints are being, what layer the constraints are in, whether it's back in the base layout, or whether it's in the start constraint set or derived constraint sets, wherever it comes from. This kind of helps you understand when your system gets really complex, what's going on in the system. And again, these all map to the different XML, and you can use that to understand and sort of visualize your XML and what's in it. Because sometimes these things will get fairly complicated. The transition, when the transition is selected, this panel provides you with all the basic navigational control of the transition. You can use it, as we saw, to create. We can go backwards and forwards. And you can even expand, change the speed of things. You can expand and see the curves of different things. It's very, very useful tool for when you're actually seeing how is your motion behaving. So as you can see, it's the keyframes, there's a toolbar, there's to create, and there's a timeline scrubber. Now, I wanted to kind of show a little bit more details about like how powerful this part of the system is for visualizing when you're trying to get a complex, subtle motions together. You can easily scrub. Notice you can see the paths that things are going on. You can even manipulate those paths. And now we have these complicated modes in the system where the path may be somewhat non-intuitive. In this particular case, I'm showing you that you just can select, when you select the view, you can then adjust each of the individual paths to and see how they behave. But in this particular case, I'm going to add something we call arc mode. And then you can add the arc mode now with a transition. And then notice they travel in these weird arcs. And you can visualize it, see what it does, understand what those modes do and how it looks, and play through the paths and see what it looks like. Okay, so so finally, I'll just show a fairly elaborate example and showing you how that panel interacts with it. You can see I'm hopping through all the different states and all the different transitions, and you're seeing all of them interacting in real time. So you can get an idea of how, and you can see all the little paths for where those objects traveled using these curves. Okay, Nicolas.
Okay, so that let us wrap up this talk. So here is a quick recap. We have Android Studio 3.6.3 as the current stable release of Android Studio. We are working really hard on this 4.0 release right now in beta 4, but beta 5 is coming very soon. and we should, we are hoping to get the stable release pretty soon as well, right? At the same time, we know that we've got those different release cycles, stable, beta, and canary, right? So we've been a lot better those last couple of years about following that. And now we have like 4.1 Canary 6. For now, all the compose tooling that we showed are only in canaries, and because we are trying to evolve with the framework of compose itself, which is iterating very fast. So for now, all those tools are in the canary releases, and same thing, we're also developing them. So better put them into canaries form. But for those 3 releases, I would really encourage you to test it. I think 4.0 right now is actually a pretty good quality level, but canary is definitely more bleeding edge. But again, keep in mind that anything that you can report to us, it's immensely useful to the team. I'll wrap up a little bit as well on the different design tools that we're providing, right? In addition, by the way, to the constraint layout library and motion layout library, our team is working on all those different tools. And we think that it's starting to come up with a really nice environment, right? Things where we really believe that it makes your life easier as a programmer. And if we are wrong, you should tell us quickly. But hopefully that really makes your life better. And what I really like about those as well is that we really built an ecosystem. It's not anymore like one tool and then this other tool that doesn't communicate. This is really an environment, and each one benefits the other. So again, a lot of new tools in 4.0. Check it out. As I mentioned, reporting feedback, super useful. But remember this URI, and please do find bugs. We're finishing this talk right now, but we're a little early, so we have a lot of time for questions. We also have a couple of polls that you may want to check if they are there. So specifically, would be interested into which version of Studio have you tried, which version of Studio you are using, and if you have tried Compose or not. And I'm going to look at the question now, and we'll go back to the polls in a few minutes, I guess. Let me open the questions. All right, so the first one is, should we expect a higher consumption of the computer resources with all these instant previews and interaction? Probably, but again, we spend a lot of time during 3.5 to build up a much more scalable architecture, and of course, it's not like we stop that work. We continuously work on this marble stuff, right? It was not just like, well, we do a one-off in 3.5 and we forgot all about those, these characteristics. As we went for the new releases, we still put a lot of engineering effort on making sure everything is scaled correctly. So yes, indeed, if we are, very visual tooling, they probably will consume a little more, but we're also trying very hard to make it work on all kind of machines and all kind of setups. Okay, so with all features for Jetpack Compose in 4.1, does it mean that Compose will be released with Studio 4.1? We'll have to see. But essentially right now, think about it more as this is the branch where we're doing the development, right? And for us, it's this. It doesn't matter too much which version we'll land, because it's more about let's make sure that we build a tool that is behaving correctly and that's efficient and etc. Which version it lands in Studio, that's actually a good lesson we learned, is stop focusing too much on each specific version, because it's much better to have more versions and not to be driven by this point release number. So we will see. That's the best answer I can say for now. So how does motions and animation transition will apply to programmatically generated elements? John, do you want to take that one?
So it's a good question. In general, there are ways to programmatically modify constraint sets and transitions. So that you take a look at the example, the code example. If all you're dealing with is a visibility that you want to have things turn on and off and you want to control it, that can be done with just saying ignore visibility and then have it ignore it. We have a couple of other structures, but remember, it is a situation where the system is animating. And sometimes you might want to use an architecture where you have like a frame layout and you have the content going inside of that frame layout and changing as we go along. But you will have cases where you're going to have to use code that actually tells the motion layout, update your hierarchy, update your system before you go kick off an animation. Or as you make the changes, you update the hierarchy.
Okay, so any plan to have a tool to understand how certain theme and views attributes are resolved? Yes, it's the layout inspector that we just talked about, at least if I understand the question. So if I misunderstand, please add another question. But that's exactly what the layout inspector does. That's actually one of the nicest things compared to the previous layout inspector that we had. Now we can actually do resolution of attributes. So if it doesn't work for your situation, or if if you have like a specific example that, or specific ideas that you would like to have in that tool, please file a bug or file a feature request, because we are really interested into making those tools better. But that's exactly what the layout inspector should be doing. Okay, can we use motion layout with Compose?
So actually that is the subject of a lot of effort on my part right now. We're trying to figure out how to make that work and what's the right paradigm. We sit right next to the Compose team, and we're looking at how can we get this to work. So that is our goal, to try and achieve that. How, when, timeline on all of it is still up in the air, because there's a lot of proof of concepts and working out how things would come together. Nicolas, any other comments?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's like a lot of it is, we need to, to investigate more exactly how we want to do it. But yeah, that's definitely something we're looking into.
So we do hope to have a motion editor and a motion layout for Compose, but we have to try and get that to work, and how it would work is a big question. Go ahead.
All right. Is Android Studio going toward or far more than Xcode storyboards? I actually, no joke, I actually don't really look at Xcode, so I'm not exactly sure what that covers. But I'm not sure how to respond to that. If you are talking about the navigation editor, we are not forgetting the navigation editor. We essentially continue to update it to be, there's actually two areas of improvements. One, we are sharing more and more infrastructure. So like, for example, this attribute panel improvements that I was talking about. We also, obviously following up the development on the navigation library. So if you have, again, same thing, if you have features that you're missing, please file bug. And that time maybe on the library side. But yes, if the library gives you new features for the navigation, we'll support that in the tool. That's the one point. Can you provide the last animation code? I think we can do that.
Yes,
John?
We have to come up with a good pattern for how do we distribute these sort of random snippets of code. It's because we don't really have a good solution to that, but we do want to, and we will like to try and figure out how we do that.
Okay, and I think that's all for the questions. So we can look back at the polls very briefly, and I think that will conclude this talk, but we can see the results. So most of you are using the stable version. Look at that. But it's like you're actually professional developers. Wow. But joking aside, you give it a try to 4.0 and 4.1, because again, the more people try those versions, the better you end with a better product, right? So But yeah, it's pretty cool to see. All right, and the next one. Which version of Studio have you tried? Well, you are actually trying a lot of the new bleeding edge stuff. So that's great. And again, please file bug if that's what you have. And I think we had the last question for the poll. So Compose is, it's in development. It's evolving like every week. We do a development in the open, right? So you can see what's going on. There is Slack channels. All the code is available immediately. And it's actually pretty cool. So you should check it out too. Okay, I think that concludes this talk. I think we may have a couple of office hours available as well if you're interested. And otherwise, I think that's all for today. Thanks again for the organizer. That's been an amazing conference, a little complicated technically, but I think that worked out okay.
Okay, thanks too. It was really great.